would be very difficult to sit here and not mention the B word. Brexit, where do you see this going? The deadline's meant to be next year. What can you see happening? Will it still happen, do you think?
It will happen unless something else stops it. Because the lunacy of triggering Article 50, and I say that quite deliberately with all the measure attached, of triggering Article 50 when Mrs May did, was to start a process that is time limited. Now there is a way under Article 50 that the UK government could request an extension, and the other member states would either agree to that or not agree to that, so it could be extended. It's open to the UK within the 2-year period to revoke Article 50. And that's an easy enough process in legislative terms. It's a rather more difficult political one. But in terms of actually reversing the process, that could be done. But in the absence of that, the clock is ticking at the expiration of the 2-year period, then the UK is out. So to trigger it when she did will go down as one of the biggest mistakes of political history ever. It's right up there with Suez, it's right up there with so many other things. And it was entirely self-inflicted. So I think there are ways in which we could see it reversed. I think there is scope for a meaningful vote in the House of Commons, but given we're seeing so much cowardice and venality from most of the MPs on both sides of the House, the SNP, of course, we're doing what we can, but we don't have the numbers to change this in ourselves. So in terms of that, I think it's more likely that we would see a preference for a second referendum. Yeah. But then it's a second referendum on what? In order to actually put a referendum forward in time, that itself would necessitate extending the Article 50 period, because you can't just make a referendum happen overnight. So it's a hell of a situation, and my job as one of the MEPs who will have a vote on the withdrawal agreement, if there is a withdrawal agreement, is to try and get as much into that as possible so that people can see what the future is actually going to be. My concern is that there's going to be an expiration of the Article 50 period, the UK will be out, but we'll still have no clarity on what's actually going to replace the current system that we're operating to, and that's bad for business, that's bad for society, that's bad for all of us.
So do you think it was wrong to put that March 29th deadline on things? You know,
absolutely. I say, and I did more in the EU referendum than most. I thought we were in trouble from the start. I thought we'd be more or less all right in Scotland, but did 40 meetings up and down the country to campaign. And I said constantly, we've got Norway over there, we've got Iceland over there, we know there's other ways of interacting with the EU, but how can you possibly, and the lesson from the Scottish referendum and independence, my party put forward the white paper which had as much detail as we could manage into here's what our proposition is, here's the proposition, you can kick the tires of it, and some people were persuaded, some people weren't, and that's democracy. But the Leave campaign specifically did not do that. There was any promise you wanted for any issue that you were into. If you were against Spanish bullfighting, there was a Leave campaign for that. If you were against immigration, there was a Leave campaign for that. If you were just a bit racist, there was a Leave campaign there too. They promised everything to everybody. And now that the promises are being shown to be either hopelessly optimistic or outright lies, they're nowhere to be seen. And Mrs May took on this poison chalice. And then to demonstrate her convert zeal and the idea that she was a Remainer, so she had to prove that she was a Leaver now, triggered Article 50 with no clue what she actually wanted to get out of the process. So if there'd been a bit of work to say, right, we're going for out means out, Brexit means Brexit, Brexit means EEA membership like Norway, that would have been legitimate. And that would have united some people would have been against that, but she specifically didn't do that, which is why we're still guddling about to work out what it's actually going to be, and that's a shameful situation for an allegedly developed democracy to be in.
And it's no secret that the majority of young people across the UK voted to remain. Is there any consolation for them moving forward, do you think? Is there anything they can look forward to? Because there's a lot of people who are still disappointed, but you've got to move forward now, so what can they look forward to?
Well, my job, I'll be quite frank, my job is still to turn this round. My job is, I have an instruction from the people of Scotland, 62% voted Remain in every counting region that we have. So that's my starting point. I also, of course, recognise the constitutional reality that we're in, but where the Scottish Government has put forward proposal after proposal after proposal, it would be difficult to say it's had much of a hearing from the UK Government. And that's doing my best not to make a political point, but that's the reality. So what we are looking to do is to take specific things like the Erasmus programme, which I did Erasmus myself. I spent a year at Heidelberg University. I then did my master's in Warsaw. I've taken advantage of these rights which we have. And the idea that future generations of Scottish students might not have those opportunities just gars me great, because it was so enriching. And the people who've been promoting Brexit hardest, their kids will get the scholarships to Princeton. Their kids will be fine. But the Erasmus programme is an incredible boost for social mobility. So what I'm working on is that, okay, let's say that Brexit does happen. It's possible for us to maintain a relationship with the Erasmus programme from Scotland, perhaps in partnership with a German land, something like that, perhaps in partnership with the EU as a special case. But it's going to cost us, and it's going to cost us more. And it's possible, and this is my frustration, it's possible to maintain every single thing that we benefit from the EU right now, social mobility grants, the training grants, the Erasmus programme and others, but it's going to cost us. Because where we used to get all of these things by virtue of being an EU member, the way that Norway has to deal with these things is that everything has a price tag. And is the UK government going to permit the Scottish government to allocate financial resources in a time when every pound's a prisoner towards making sure that the Erasmus programme maintains for Scotland? Or would they stop us doing that? And this is when we'll really get to the clarity about what we're in danger of losing. And my fear is that it'll happen after Brexit actually happens, and it'll be too late, because once the UK is out, the EU is very clear, it's a third country coming back in from the start. So there's no question of just being out then popping back in again. It will be tabula rasa if we actually get there.
Because the vote was so narrow, do you think there should have been a threshold on the vote? So, or would that be?
I think there's all sorts of things that could have been done, should have been done. The SNP at Westminster, we opposed the vote, full stop. We didn't see it as a vote that anybody was clamouring for outside of some extremists within the Tory party and UKIP. And we thought it was a dangerous time to have any vote about anything, because there's so much discontent floating around in the ether. We see this with the election of Trump, we see this with what's going on in some other countries. But our guys put forward at Westminster, as the referendum legislation was going through, a proposal to have 16, 17-year-olds included in the vote, because that's just a progressive thing to do. We have 16, 17-year-olds can vote in everything that the Scottish Parliament has competence for. We also proposed a double majority, that there should be a majority of votes across the UK and also within each of the 4 home nations for it to take effect. We also proposed a time-limited period for it. So if that had brought forward 16, 17-year-olds coming in on a vote that was as narrow as it was, that could have tipped it. If we had the situation, if you count it off in terms of home nations, it was 2-2, it was 2-all. Northern Ireland and Scotland voted clearly to remain. It was England and Wales that voted to leave. And yet, because it was a one UK vote, that's where we are. So there was a lot of proposals that we did put forward. I'm wary of thresholds, I have to say. In the absence of making voting compulsory, I think the people who turn up and vote are the people who make the decision, which is why voting is so important. But we did propose a number of ways in which this could have respected the democracies and situations within the UK.
Because 62% of people in Scotland, the voters, decided to remain, wanted to remain. Do you think, obviously you spend a lot of time in Europe, in Brussels, do you think Europe's attitude's different to Scotland than it is to the rest of the UK, England and Wales, who've effectively pulled everyone out? Do you think?
Totally. In 2014, we were, and we are, pro-European, ecological, we've got a gender-balanced cabinet, social democratic. We're at the political mainstream of European thinking. But there is a lot of people in Brussels who just have an issue with the N-word. Nationalism is a bad thing, nationalism is backward-looking, nationalism is about putting up borders rather than breaking them down. And they didn't quite buy our proposition that, but we want to be independent in order to join things. Join NATO as Scotland, join the EU as Scotland, join anything as Scotland. So make our own decisions at home, but speak with our own voice, rather than be represented by a UK that, I would contend, isn't representing us as well as we could ourselves. And the EU question within the referendum was absolutely fundamental. A lot of people voted no to stick with the UK on the basis of what I think was scaremongering, that we would have been somehow cast into outer darkness and in a queue behind Turkey and Albania and the Romulan Empire to actually apply for the EU membership. But now that that has reversed and inverted, there's a lot of people in Brussels who now do get the, oh, yes, you do mean it. And I made a speech in Italy, in the anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, made a speech there in my kilt, I always kilt it up when I can to fly the flag a wee bit, and made a speech about how Scotland voted to remain and Scotland wants it. So you've got a crowd of European federalists flying the European federalist flag, saying down with nationalism, down with Scotland, down with nationalism, borders are bad, but the Scots are all right. So there's a wee bit cognitive dissonance in some of that, but I think there's a lot more people now understand why we want to be independent. We want to be independent in order to join things, in order to have that bigger canvas to make decisions on. We will do better representing our interests within the EU, finding common cause with other countries. And I'm afraid that the Brexit vote has shown that there is a big, ugly element to UK politics right now. And because we're conducting all of this in English and so many EU nationals are living here, there's a lot of people across the wider continent are reading our press, are reading the front page of the Daily Mail, are reading the Daily Express, and they're not realising that that's not the mainstream, but my fear is that it increasingly is the mainstream. And it's a ugly, selfish, backward-looking politics. And it's utterly negative because there's no consensus on what the people who are in favour of Brexit actually want to achieve. They know what they don't want, they know what they don't like, but they don't know what they do. And in the absence of that, I think there's a real vacuum into which we're going to see some nastiness expand. I think UKIP will reinvent itself as Britain first. And there's going to be a market for that, and we need to tread really carefully with where we are just now. But in terms of attitudes to Scotland, yes, it's totally inverted from 2014. We have goodwill in spades.
Yeah. So with that in mind, do you think there's more appetite now for a second Scottish independence referendum? Do you think the appetite's stronger than it was in 2014?
My sense of it is that there's a lot of people who are more open to the question now than they were. Roughly the 45-ish% of people who were pro-independence are still pro-independence. Yeah. I think there's a further 20-ish, 25% who were pretty hostile, or no, that's the wrong word, pretty unpersuaded last time round, but are now much more open to the question on the basis of, I voted to remain within the EU, that's been taken away from me. I hate the way that Scotland's democracy is being trashed at every opportunity by a government that is clearly not caring about our interests. The way that the Scottish Government has put forward compromise solutions, however uncomfortable, we propose single market membership as something that, well, it would be a less bad way of doing this. And it's been comprehensively dismissed by a Tory party that can't decide what it wants itself. So the people of Scotland are watching this process and actually looking at Holyrood with fresh eyes in terms of, well, these guys are actually talking my language much more than I'm seeing from down the road. But these are the people who are open to the question but not necessarily persuaded as yet, would be my sense of it. And I think the questions that I'm getting are genuine ones. It's, will there be customs posts at Carlisle? A big enough issue for this bit of the world. How will the border work? Because, of course, our proposition last time round was we all remain within the EU and the single market and the customs union, so there's no border worth the name at Carlisle. Yes. But what we now are going to have to deal with, and we're keeping a close eye on, is that depending upon where Brexit Britain gets to in terms of tariffs and customs and that sort of stuff, there are real issues that we're going to need to deal with. And there is no question that the UK is and will remain a major trading partner for us because geography matters. So we need to have a proposition that is solid. I think there's still a number of questions about an independence proposition that until we see where Brexit Britain gets to, and we're not in charge of that process, I think the people who are now open to independence have got questions that need proper answers, because I'm firmly of the view that we would not emulate the Leave campaign with it'll be all right in the night, we'll fix it later. I don't think the Scots are like that. I think we need a proper proposition with proper answers. And at the moment there's a number of questions that don't have an answer to, that we don't have an answer to yet. So I think we need to work on that and bring it forward at the proper time, which is frustrating for some of my guys who are champing at the bit to go for it right now. But until such point as we've got a properly worked out prospectus, and I have to say, a lot more vocal support from the EU for an independent Scotland's membership. Now, of course, that changes utterly in the event Brexit happens. The day and hour Brexit happens, we become the pro-European good guys, and that will flip. and the EU is an expansionist organisation. The EU wants our resources, wants our oil and gas, wants our fisheries grounds, wants our people. So there is going to be a very different political dynamic to any putative independence vote in the event we get to that. But I remain pro-independence, but until we have a workable, solid proposition that actually answers people's questions, I don't think we're ready for it yet, so I don't think we are.
Yeah. So why would it be more beneficial to stay in Europe but not within the UK?
Well, my concern is partly economic, but partly political, partly about what sort of society we want to be. We are going to see a Brexit pretext that's going to slash social spending, that's going to slash environmental protections, that's going to slash many of the rules that we rely upon for justice at work, environmental protection. These are European rules, because we've been doing this for 40 years. So there is an element of the Brexiter campaign that wants to slash all this, because they would dismiss that as red tape that's holding business back. There is going to be an economic shock that's going to necessitate reform. Leaving the EU in itself means that we're going to need to see reform anyway, but I think we'll see a diminished discussion, a diminished debate. Because we're part of the EU, we're setting targets with 500 million people, and we're at the mainstream. The challenges which are facing humanity are bigger than Scotland, bigger than the UK. Working together, we can do a lot more. And I see that the Brexit pretext will be used to withdraw from that, to withdraw from the wider world, the wider discussion. I mean, they talk a lot about global Britain, but it's all about what global Britain can get from the world rather than contribute to it. Where I think the EU gives us an apparatus to do that. It's economically far in our interests to remain part of the EU single market, as the UK, or indeed Scotland. But in terms of where the UK is going to get to, I think we'll see an economically diminished UK. I think we'll see a society that will be under massive pressures because of that economic shock, but also because of deregulation. We're seeing some of this with the rollout of universal credit already. We're seeing a lot of the most vulnerable in our society are being hit hardest before it's even started. So I think there will be a choice between two unions, ultimately, that the people of Scotland are going to need to make. And look at where Ireland has been able to get to because of the EU support, the EU membership, the wider canvas in which Ireland can work. If we're limited to a discussion that begins and ends in a flawed democracy on the banks of the Thames, I think we will see poorer outcomes. I think we'll also see that the Scottish Parliament will have an awful lot of its powers curtailed. And I think that will take us in a bad direction.
Thanks very much, Alan. Would you like to take any questions from the audience, if anyone's got any?
I'm not sure whether this is going to be a question or a comment for your observations. When you were talking about the sort of 20% of people you think are now looking again at whether or not, if there was another referendum, they would vote yes rather than no, and you talked about some of the reasons for that, I think the thing you didn't touch on, and it's something that concerns me, a great many people in the UK have family across the UK, and I am concerned about an increasing divide becoming a Scotland against England. And I think we saw some of that in the World Cup as well, in terms of how people reacted to England doing really very well. And I think when one has relatives on the other in England, it can become very embarrassing and upsetting to feel that they are upset by some of the things that they are reading that are coming from an element of the nationalist side of Scotland that some of us would not want to relate to. And I just am making a comment that I think if that goes forward, there has to be discussion about the emotional side of it, the family, social side of it, as well as the economics in terms, and I think it's something that's perhaps not always being addressed very well at the present, or not being considered. Your thoughts on that?
Very happily. I mean, I'm an English qualified lawyer. I went to Leeds University, I went to Nottingham Law School, I worked in the City of London. I'm one of the UK's closest friends. I want to see the people in these islands do well, and Brexit is bad news for everybody. But equally, I think Scotland has a different choice to make, and the social union is always going to be there. The social union is clearly going to maintain, and much of what you're saying, I think the media does a wee bit much in exaggerating that sort of stuff. I mean, there's always some some punter will be anyone but England at the football, that sort of stuff. And in my experience, there's really very few SNP people who actually have that sort of attitude. I think there is around the fringes, agreed, but there's fringes on the other end as well. So I think if the media is amplifying what the fringes are saying, it looks a lot more divisive than it actually is. And there's always the banter about football, which I don't share myself, I don't follow a team. But there was that, and I can't deny that was there, and how people feel, particularly in England, about the sense of, you're walking away, help us fix it. Help us make Brexit better. Why are people talking about an independence referendum? Well, actually, we're talking about independence, yes, of course, but the reason why we've reset the timetable is because there's more things to be discussed as yet. So the social union absolutely continues. I want to see Scotland as the best friend and best neighbour of the UK. But that needs to be done on the basis of respect. And in 2014, we were told we're a family of nations, we're a partnership of equals. We're now being told, a couple of years later, to shut up and get to the back of the bus, despite our clearly expressed democratic choice to remain within the EU, despite the total cross-party unanimity within the Scottish Parliament, minus the Conservatives, in favour of the Scottish Government's engagement strategy about maintaining our best interests as a society and an economy within the single market, the customs union. So you're right, there is a really important social element to this, and the last thing that's going to happen in the event of an independence vote in independent Scotland is cutting any ties. All of those ties continue. The people who are in the business of putting up borders at the moment are the Brexiters. And if the people of Scotland don't feel part of this family of nations that we were told we were part of, then the people of Scotland have the right to make a different decision.
Right, thanks very much. I think that's all we've got time for. Unfortunately, we could probably sit here and talk all day.
I suspect we could. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much for coming in. Thanks very much for talking to all.